let us begin here. So, what I wanted to do this time, I keep saying to myself when we start these things, and then when I start putting together is, okay, what we'll do is we'll push on and we'll just keep going, and we'll maybe take an entire chapter and cover it. But there's so much in here that I found it very difficult to do that. And so I was looking, for example, at the Acts 4, starting at Acts 4, at Acts 4:32, and then going. I thought, oh, we go all the way to the end of chapter 5. Well, no, we in fact we probably only get as far as 5:17. I mean, we can still try to plow on as well, but there's a lot of material there that I didn't understand when I started going into it, and that I wanted to kind of share. So let us start with Acts chapter 4, verse 32. And if we could start, Doug, if you could read 32 through 37.
Certainly. All the believers were one in heart and mind. No one claimed that any of his possessions was his own, but they shared everything they had. With great power, the apostles continued to testify to the resurrection of the Lord Jesus, and much grace was upon them all. There were no needy persons among them, for time to time those who owned land or houses sold them, brought the money from the sales, and put it at the apostles' feet, and it was distributed to anyone as he had need. Joseph, the Levite from Cyprus, whom the apostles called Barnabas, which means son of encouragement, sold a field he owned and brought the money and put it at the apostles' feet.
Okay, good. Now let's start with the first, the very first phrase. Now I'll give you my translation here. Now the full number of those who believed were of one heart or soul, heart and soul. So what do you think that means?
They were united in what they believed.
In Christ.
Okay, but do you think it means more than that? That they, or was it just simply a shared belief? Do you think that perhaps they have one of the first questions was, did they all live together?
They were a commune.
Yeah, I mean, were they? Does it say that in the scriptures?
No.
It's,
They just said they all believed.
Well, they say that they were, yeah, the full number of all those who believed were of one heart and soul. So we're talking. How many people are we talking about? If you recall the previous week.
3,000.
3,000.
Well, it increased last week.
Wasn't it like 5,000?
Around 5,000, yes. So they probably, again, the number of people in all of Jerusalem is probably, I mean, that would be a significant number. So I think it's probably fairly unlikely that they all they had a community. A community of 5,000 people, let me see. So I live in a community of 1,800 houses, which is a pretty good chunk of land, and all the houses are next to each other. And if they were a community where they were growing their own food and raising animals, which presumably they would have to do, they had to, well, but also they needed more land. And so you're talking about a fairly large, if there were actually 5,000 people there, it would be a fairly large, almost an ancient city. So probably they didn't all live together. They probably just lived. There was a core group. I think probably the apostles lived together, and maybe Some of the other ones who, to be blunt, probably worked for them or waited on them. You know, this is still an era where you had slaves.
Well, if he fed the 5,000 and they all came from different areas, I wouldn't imagine this 5,000 would be centrally located.
No, they probably all lived in the city, in Jerusalem or nearby, near enough that they could come for services. But it would not have all been living next door to each other.
But then they had city walls, and the walls took a fair amount of room around, but if you want to be safe, you want to be inside the wall.
That's true.
So probably a lot of the gardens and things were outside the wall.
Yes, you're probably right.
The Garden of Gethsemane, for instance, was 800 to 1,000 feet from the wall.
Yes, I would not say that. That in fact is more evidence that they didn't all live in the same place.
Right.
Or if they did, they would. They certainly didn't keep their animals in there with them. In fact, I remember that, if you look at London, which is the city with which I'm most familiar, the old city with which I am most familiar, in the early days of it, it was small, and where people actually lived and worked is the area that's called the city, which is now, of course, the business district there. Thames on one side, and everything outside of that was fields. What we know of as the West End was the west end of the area, and that's where it was all fields. The famous church of St. Martin in the Fields. It wasn't St. Martin that was in the fields, it was the church that was in the fields. And that's right now, it's in Trafalgar Square, which is about as densely populated a place as you can imagine. And there has been a church there probably since Anglo-Saxon times. Interesting question would be, when did they add the words "in the fields"? Well, it was obviously done to distinguish it from some other St. Martin's church. But again, that's a small area where people lived, and a larger area where people went out and they worshipped or they worked. Yes, I'm sorry.
I wouldn't get wrapped up in the term 5,000. I think all we're trying to say is there's a significant number.
Yeah. And that's very true as well. I mean, you used particularly in the when you're dealing with the scriptures or in ancient literature of any sort, they tended to use round numbers. Now, Luke, if anybody, was into detail. But you're right, he probably didn't mean 5,000 as an absolute number. He just meant he meant a lot of people, and more people than there were when it was 4,000, 3,000.
Did you ever try to count 100 chickens?
Oh, I can only imagine. I've never
Let
tried
alone
to count.
5,000.
Well, interestingly, so anybody been following the thing on the screwworm?
Yeah.
Well, I heard today from I think it may have been Deutsche Welle, I'm not sure, but they said that one of the big problems that the USDA has suggested an approach to dealing with the screwworm problem in Texas. I think there's also one in Arizona and New Mexico. And they say that you need to follow the cattle and determine which ones are bad and individually cure them. And a lot of ranchers are saying, we got 10,000 acres and thousands of head of cattle. There is no way that we are going to be able to keep track of every single one of them and determine which one is sick.
And just recently, one of the them that was attacked was a pet, a dog that had a scratch, and the fly found the dog.
I
It's a
think that's
mammal.
the- I
Any
think that's
mammal
the-
is.
I think that's the one in New Mexico or Arizona, yeah. And it's the cow in Texas, which would make sense. So yeah, it's difficult to keep track of all these numbers. It's just a lot. So the other thing that's interesting is in when they talked about no one said that any of the things belonged to him was his own, but they had everything in common. So we talked about this before and what that actually meant. And it's interesting, and Dale, this is something that you probably know more about than I do, is that in the Qumran community, they had something similar, but it was not voluntary. You had to give up your property to the community. You had to sell everything. You couldn't have anything outside.
You have to
And
become a member of the group.
that's right, you gave up everything to do so. It was like being a monk. You know, monks don't own their own property, presumably, or nuns. They have, it's all been given up.
But there was only like 1 or 2% were Essenes. Very small group.
Right, but that's one where you actually have a rule that, that the people that we now read and we kind of know what they were how they governed themselves. Because the reason I mentioned it is because there's a difference here. There it was a requirement. Here, apparently, as we go along and look at the way that they comported themselves and how this worked, it was entirely voluntary. And when we see from the stories here, the two stories, right? One of them is the story about Barnabas. Now, one of the things that Luke likes to do is he'll throw in a name of somebody and he'll say a little something about him, and then that's kind of the end. Until a whole bunch of chapters later, and all of a sudden they become a major character. So from Barnabas, we know that has a he's from Cyprus. He had a field, all right. Doesn't say whether the field was actually in Cyprus or whether it was in Judea. But he sold the land voluntarily. He wasn't forced to do it. He is being held up as a paragon of virtue here because he did it
Voluntarily.
not because he had to do it, but because he voluntarily did it. And that's like when we give money to the church, we do so voluntarily. We're not being forced to do it. And there's some churches that are a little bit more of give me all your property and whatever. But most of the mainstream churches, it is entirely voluntary. Here you start to see the foundations of what became the medieval and then the modern church on how the believers were to relate to the church community. And come a few more verses, we'll find something else interesting about the church itself. But it was what's particularly interesting about this as well is we know that that Luke was a Gentile originally. He was Greek, and probably fairly wealthy himself. Otherwise, he would not have, well, if he was indeed a doctor, he would not have been able to do so without having been quite well educated. And we know from his writing that he was quite well educated. And what, when he starts talking about this, they held everything in common, that actually would ring true for the Gentiles who were reading this or who encountered the community, because there was an idealized Greek society that Aristotle talks about back in the good old days, and for the Greeks there were 3 ages of man. There was the Golden Age, when everything was flowing with milk and honey, and everything was given for you. You didn't have to work for anything because it was all there. Then there was the Silver Age, which was a bit tougher, and then there was the Iron Age, which is what they were living in now, where things were absolutely terrible. And like a lot of people, they looked back to this age that may never have existed. And it was back in the good old days, they which of course they hadn't lived through, and nobody that they actually knew had lived through, which was probably only existed in memory and may not have existed in reality. Anyway, in those days, everything was held in common. You didn't have private property because you didn't need to have private property, because everything was done on a voluntary basis, and everything was shared. And there are we talked the last time we discussed this. We talked about some of the political philosophies that came later, but one of them we didn't mention was anarchism, where people like Peter Kropotkin believed that it was in the essence of people to want to cooperate, to want to share. And it's only when you got into the bad ages that it was that they stopped doing so. And in an idealized society, everybody would go back to that. And so it was again, these are people not necessarily living in the real world, and looking back to an age that didn't necessarily exist. But they firmly believed that this was the case, and that there was no necessity to have any kind of compunction to do anything, because everybody would want to. And some people, some of the Christian, some of the Christian sects, later ones, turned to like this area, this section in Acts, and said, "See, this is the way it should be," right? And the next question was, of course, well, was it ever? But the thing that's important also is that in the Old Testament, there was the Old Testament ideal was, again, that nobody was needy, nobody needed anything, because again, the community would take care of you. It's only later, of course, where you get into trouble that falls by the wayside. So you would have the people in Jerusalem who were Jews who would look at this and say, "Oh, yeah, I remember seeing this, reading about this in the Old Testament." And then you would have people, Greeks saying, I remember what Aristotle said. Those were the good old days. And maybe these people, they said, had a point. And that was, that I think is what Luke is trying to say. He says, we cover all the bases here. It was the good old days for everybody. And so, and here's a guy, Barnabas, who, by the way, eventually, of course, is one of Paul's companions. Here's a guy who we can use. He was probably Greek because he was from Cyprus. Now, Cyprus is an odd. I studied for an entire year.
In Cyprus?
No, unfortunately, I did not. I've never been to Cyprus. I'd love to go there, but I'd never been there. I studied Cypriot archaeology for an entire year, and starting with the early Bronze Age and going all the way up to the Roman period. So it's been many years, and I don't remember very much about it. But I did learn something then, and that was Cyprus is a crossroads. A lot of trade went through Cyprus. Obviously, copper was one of them. That being connected one way or the other with the name, either known as copper. Cyprus means Copper Island, or copper means Cypriot metal, depending on how you interpret it. And so, and they had trade in all sorts of things, and a lot of people who lived there made a lot of money. So there is back when I was a student, there are these pottery. I guess it would look kind of like a stand. And then placed in the stand were these somewhat semi-conical vessels. And they were painted with white stripes on them. Nobody really knew what they were and why they were done like that. And some young archaeologists suggested that that they were containers for opium juice. And that the white stripes were when you slash the capsule. That's why they were the shape they were, because they looked like the capsules from an opium poppy. And you slash the capsule, the juice when it comes out turns white. Well, we had quite a lot to say about what these guys probably were doing at the time they came up with this theory. But 20 years later, somebody went and analyzed the inside of the vessels, and by gosh, it was opium in there. Poppy juice. And so, as I said,
were the lotus eaters.
there was a lot of trade in a lot of things that went through Cyprus. And so Barnabas could well have had quite a lot of property. And the other interesting thing that I noted when I was reading about this was that it doesn't seem to, nowhere in Acts here, in the section of Acts, does it say he gave up his house. They said that they had houses, they said that they had fields, but not necessarily the place where they lived. And that would make sense, given that if it was a small area, you couldn't all of a sudden have everybody selling their houses and coming in and moving in with you. It was probably stuff that they had. Maybe they inherited it. Maybe they had bought it from somebody else. Whatever they had, and then gave up that surplus land to the church, to the community. Because nowhere does it say that he moved out of his house, sold everything that he had, and moved in with the guys. And so that's essentially though the Luke's view of the icon, if you will, the iconic figure of how you handled this. He was the figure of what someone should do. Now we go to the next one, and that would be Ananias. And if you, could read from the beginning of 5 to 6th verse, through the 6th verse. 1 through 6.
Okay. Now a man named Ananias, together with his wife Sapphira, also sold a piece of property. With his wife's full knowledge, he kept back part of the money for himself, but he bought the rest of it and put it at the apostles' feet. Then Peter said, Ananias, how is it that Satan has so filled your heart that you have lied to the Holy Spirit and have kept for yourself some of the money you received for the land? Didn't it belong to you before it was sold? And after it was sold, wasn't the money at your disposal? What made you think of doing such a thing? You have not lied to men, but to God. When Ananias heard this, he fell down and died. And a great fear seized all who heard what had happened. Then the young men came forward, wrapped up his body, and carried him out and buried him.
Okay, so a number of points. This obviously was not a good person in Luke's eyes. So what did he do that was so wrong?
He had the pretense of making a donation.
Well, he did make a donation,
He
right?
made the donation,
But he might have claimed it was everything.
yes.
Well, he did.
But it
claim
doesn't say that
everything.
here.
There was a pretense there,
Right. In fact,
untruth.
yes, and as we go along, we will find out that he did actually say that that was the whole thing. And so, again, it is this is evidence that it was voluntary. Nobody said to him, sell the property and give us the funds. He came in and sold it. He said, I sold the property and here's the money. And so, Peter, of course, finds out that it may have been through the Holy Spirit. It may have been come to him in a dream. Dreams are very important. Or somebody may have said, hey, did you know where this guy did? And
Well, everybody might have known he had 10 acres, and it was worth at least $1,000 an acre, so it should have been 10,000. And it was only
Sure.
5,000 turned in,
yeah,
or 1,000, whatever.
and so, but the point here is that not so much what he did, but what he said. That he lied about it. He said, I gave this all the property, all the money for the property, but he and his wife kept it back. And that's when Peter says to him, hey, Satan has gotten into you. And so you are going to suffer the consequences for having lied to the Holy Spirit. At which point he falls down dead. Now, Peter does not apparently have the ability. Peter himself is not calling down the lightning from heaven, although some scholars say that's what he was doing. Rather, it seems to me, having read the text here, is he's merely predicting what's going to happen. And and yes, guess what? It does. And Peter also attributes the act to having come from Satan. And there are two other instances I can think of in the New Testament and the Gospels, where Satan goes into someone. One of them a bad guy, and one of them a good guy, and they end up doing something that perhaps they should not have been doing. Now, we all know one of them would have been was Judas. Anybody remember the other? Peter himself.
Oh,
Get thee behind me, Satan.
Hmm.
You are thinking of the things of this world and not of the world beyond. And that's what Ananias is doing. He is thinking of this world. He kept back the money so that he and his wife probably had some more, to live more comfortably. Rather than give it to the church where he would have, or the community where he'd have no control over it.
Not to be argumentative,
Oh yes, this is exactly the place to be argumentative.
in the 6 verses here, it never says, in my translation, here is all the money for the field.
Yes, and
He said,
then,
here's a donation. He didn't say it was all the money. He didn't say,
if you read the next one, the next verse. Peter said to her, actually the 8th verse, tell me whether you sold the land for so much. And she said, yes, for so much.
mhm.
So
Not
the amount of
for
money
anymore.
contributed was the amount of money they sold the land for, is what his wife says. So yes, it is there.
For
Just
so
that-
much and no more.
that was the next thing we were going to get to.
Okay, so really we were jumping the gun.
But the
Mhm.
Holy
That's fine.
Spirit-
Anticipating it, yes, right, yes.
So she's really the guilty one, if you will.
Well, the two of them were conspired,
No,
because it
but-
does say, it does say, and with his wife's knowledge, he kept back for himself some of the proceeds.
Mhm.
So the two of them were in it together.
Mhm.
and it was the Holy
That seems to be
Spirit.
one of the few times that you have a man blaming his wife.
Oh yeah? What about Genesis?
Well, that's what I mean. It's always, I mean,
That's it. Hey,
it's
The
not,
wife gave
it's
it to
not
him,
my
I gave it to
doing,
me, and I ate
my,
it.
it's just like Genesis.
But they never, in this, they never said this is all the money.
well,
It says here in my thing, and he kept back part of the proceeds.
Mm-hmm.
His wife, also being
Yes.
aware of
Right.
it, brought a certain part and laid it at the apostles' feet.
Oh,
But Peter said, Ananias, why has Satan filled your heart to lie to the Holy Spirit and to keep back for yourself part of the proceeds of the land? That's what it says in this translation.
and I forgot my Greek, so
While
I
it
didn't.
remained unsold, did it not remain your own? And after it was sold, was it not at your disposal? Why is it that you have contrived this deed in your heart? And that's before they get to the wife.
Yes,
So it's yours is a different translation.
Where does it say that he told them this is all the money?
he doesn't, he just says, no, it says that Ananias came and laid the money,
Right.
but Peter knows, somehow or another Peter knows,
So what's wrong with him holding back some of the money? He gave him a donation.
because
He lied about it.
because,
Where?
which
Again,
came
I
first?
said, it sold a wife sold a possession, and he kept back
Mm-hmm.
part of the proceeds, his wife also being aware of it. That right there is telling you that
Indicates.
indicates that he's lying.
Well, and also when Peter says, why is, to keep back for yourself part of the proceeds, he's accusing him of doing that. If Ananias didn't do that, wouldn't the first thing he'd say would be, no, you're wrong.
No, I'm not saying he didn't keep back some of the money, but he never said he was giving him all the money.
Well, then why did he just say, look, I sold it for this amount of money, but I'm giving you this? He doesn't say that in here.
Yeah, he should have, probably.
And Peter says,
Given what happened,
and Peter
yes.
says he could have. Because Peter says, and when after it was sold, was it not at your disposal? You could do whatever you wanted with it after it was sold.
Mhm.
But the implication then is, you told us that it was all coming to us.
Okay, but it doesn't say that, did it?
It says, why is it that you have contrived this deed in your heart? You have not lied to man, but to God.
And when Ananias heard this word, he fell down and breathed his last, as it says here.
So obviously he lied, or else he wouldn't have died.
Could be clearer.
Well, that's what happens when you try to translate out of a different language. Okay, so while we're there doing that, Suzanne, could you read from 7 to 11?
Now it was about 3 hours later when his wife came in, not knowing what had happened. And Peter answered her, "Tell me whether you sold the land for so much." She said, "Yes, for so much." Then Peter said to her, "How is it that you have agreed together to test the Spirit of the Lord? Look, the feet of those who have buried your husband are at the door, and they will carry you out." Then immediately she fell down at his feet and breathed her last, and the young men came in and found her dead, and carried her out, buried by her husband. So great fear came upon all the church and upon all who heard these things.
So, one of the things that, by the way, that just occurred to me is, who are the young men? Because are they Christians? Are they professional? They work for the funeral parlor?
Part of the group, come on you guys, take them out.
But again, she is, Peter says directly to her, what is it that, did you, did you sell this for, and give us the whole amount? And I think, I know you're going to say that it doesn't actually say that in so many words, but he said, tell me whether you sold the land for so much. And the so much is the amount of money that was given. Isn't there, if he said, sold the land for the amount of money that was given us? Now that may not be hugely, perfectly clear, but it seems pretty clear to me. So, because he is saying that he's giving you a sum, and only one piece of property that was related to that sum.
They were being a bit hypocritical.
And so, the same thing happens, of course, to that it happens to her, and she doesn't defend herself, and she dies, and then they come and they carry her away, and the last line is particularly interesting because there's a word in it that appears for the first time in the New Testament.
Fear.
Nope.
The whole church.
Great fear.
The whole church.
Church.
On the whole
Church.
church.
Oh,
Church. The word church doesn't appear anywhere before in it is, whether it's the Greek ecclesia, and, which in, to the Gentiles would have referred to a civic assembly, you know, in a city-state, the people getting together, in the trial of Socrates, I believe he talks about the ecclesia. Plato talks about the assembly, which makes decisions. Of course, this particular word has been the subject of much debate, what it actually means. Now, clearly at this point, we're not looking at a church as a building, but we're looking at a church as an assembly. And in Jewish practice, in the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Old Testament, when the word appears, it refers to a religious assembly. So that would have been, so Luke is referring here to, and introducing a word that the Greeks would understand as a ruling body, and the Jews would understand as a religious governing body. So, in the early 1600s, when King James called together all of the translators and said, "I want you to put together a new translation of the Bible." There were really two groups within among the translators. Now, mind you, there were no dissenters among them. There were no Jews. There were no Quakers. There were no, if they even had Quakers then. There were none of these Lutherans or any of these people floating around Germany and Eastern Europe. They were all Church of England. But of course, the Church of England at this time is made up of two groups of people. One are the staunch, high church types of people, and Archbishop Laud, and those groups of very rigid, shall we say, liturgical Christians. And then you had our friends the Puritans, who were rigid in their own way, but were not rigid so much rigid liturgically. And the liturgical Christians wanted to translate the Greek word ecclesia as church. And the Puritans wanted to translate it as congregation. And the whole thing almost collapsed over that single word. And you can see how the two interpretations could have arisen from this very, this very sentence here, and what we've learned so far in Acts. And so of course it was up to King James, who, like Constantine, was sort of presiding over the whole thing, and he said essentially, "Nope, church it is. Go on. Let's keep working on this." Because again, being a reasonably astute politician, he would have known that that things could collapse if somebody wasn't going to step in and make a decision here. So he did. Okay, now the other thing is interesting is okay. Let's go on to the. I'm sorry, please.
One question, because it's being translated from Latin where it's being translated from Greek.
Greek.
And-
Although they had the Latin version at their disposal.
And so what would it have been in Latin? I'm just curious.
Probably ecclesia. I
Yeah.
think it's the same word. But it borrowed from the Greek. I'm pretty sure what Jerome, I'll look it up, but I'm pretty
Okay.
sure that's what Jerome would have used. And, but the whole argument, if you read the preface to the King James Bible,
Mhm.
they say, we went back to the original scriptures, or the originals,
Right.
which would have been Greek and Hebrew. Didn't always, if they had problems, they looked and saw what the Latin had to say. But their position was that the Latin version had so many mistakes in it that we needed to,
Go back.
go back before that, yes.
Okay.
But so many of them spoke Aramaic. That was a written language as well.
Yes. They would have spoken Aramaic, but it appears in the Old Testament only in a few phrases. There's not a lot of Aramaic in pure Aramaic in the Bible. So now we know that Jesus, when he spoke to his disciples, would have spoken Aramaic. Because that's what they used. That was their common language. And he certainly knew Hebrew, and he probably knew Latin and Greek. There are Aramaic versions, as there are Syriac, which is a descendant of Aramaic, versions of the Bible. And sometimes when there are questions, they go to the Aramaic translation of the Greek. And there's been a theory for discussion for a number of centuries that there were two versions of St. Matthew. One was Aramaic and one was Greek. So they've never found the Aramaic version, if it existed. It's just one of the church fathers said, "Oh, by the way, this is what existed." So, okay, let's Dale, if you could read from 12 to 14. Well, no, it goes. That's the middle of a sentence. 15. The end of 15.
And by the hands of the apostle were many signs and wonders wrought among the people, and they were all with one accord in Solomon's porch. And of the rest durst no man join himself to them, but the people magnified them. And believers were the more added to the Lord, multitudes both of men and women, insomuch that they brought forth the sick into the streets and laid them on beds and couches, that the least the shadow of Peter passing by them might overshadow some of them.
Okay, so in verses 12 and 13, don't they appear to be contradictory? So, now many signs and wonders were regularly done among the people, and then skip. None of the rest dared join them. They were all together in Solomon's porch, but none of the rest dared join them.
They were scared of,
But who were the rest?
Non-believers? Bystanders? No.
And yet, They then talk about people bringing them sick people and things like that.
People are
If they,
afraid.
the word went out, of course, that Ananias and Sapphira had,
People are afraid.
right, they had heard about that.
They've heard about that and they respect it,
But they didn't say
but
the
that
five,
doesn't mean they feel comfortable with it.
and they didn't say the 5,000 were all believers.
Yeah, they did. Well, that's right. They don't say, yeah, no, they talk about how they were all converted.
But is it a conversion of fear or a conversion of belief?
And more than ever, believers were added to the Lord, multitudes of both men and women.
Right. So those who received his word were baptized. That's 241. And there were added that day about 3,000 souls.
So there were,
But
they don't
yeah,
say
so the
there
question becomes, are these believers who were scared and didn't want to come? Or somebody else? And I throw this out because, again, it's a matter of great debate. And some scholars, I mean, a number of scholars have tried to amend the text to get rid of the difficulties.
of course, it could have been
Says
like
none of the rest did join.
It could have been that it's an entertainment too.
could be like
You know,
the
because they're
parable of
fascinated,
the,
they've heard word of mouth, did you hear so-and-so was cured, and so they're going to see. Some of them are believers and others are possible future believers. or
And
not.
some of them didn't join them because...
They're afraid.
So I think that there's sort of a middle ground here. That yes, there were numerous believers, and they were never going to. Those are the ones who were seriously committed. Then there were those who were kind of, you
it's like the
know.
parable of the seeds, you know, they threw out the seeds and the ones that took hold, they were believers. But then there was ones that something
The
happened.
thin soil. you
Yeah.
know, and
They
the-
show
Something
up, but they
happens
never
and-
show up full time.
Yeah, something happens and they go, oh, well, maybe not.
So and then you're right. There were probably people who were attracted because it was a good show.
Yeah.
But and if they had some sick people there, why not bring them along just to see what would happen, right? And so
Well, Jesus had been
Well, they
healing
heard-
people
yeah, they
before
heard
that,
about
and
people touching the hem of his garment, or
yeah, it was only
you know,
100 and some days since Jesus died, so they thought the apostles would be able to continue doing it,
which they did.
which they did. Yeah.
And so that is the but again, there once you start thinking about three different groups: the believers, the committed believers, the sort of wishy-washy believers, and the non-believers who again came for the party. So if you could finish up the last line, Christine, verse 16.
the people also gathered from the towns around Jerusalem, bringing the sick and those afflicted with unclean spirits, and they were all healed.
All of a sudden, the word is starting to spread beyond Jerusalem itself. And then you're getting to, well, within Jerusalem, of course, because again, it was an important city. It's certainly the most important city in this particular Roman colony. That there were people from all over the Roman world. But once you get beyond the walls, if you have it, of the city, and you get out into the countryside, they're all Jews. Almost all of them are going to be. Maybe a few Samaritans. And these are, and these would, so what Luke, I think, is trying also to say here is not only did did the word go out to people who were, shall we say, sophisticated, because they're worldly. There's a good word, because they were worldly, but also to the farmers outside who maybe made a visit to Jerusalem once in their lifetime, because of course that's what you were supposed to do.
Pilgrimage.
Yeah. And so that is so now you start to see, not only are we going from are we making different religious groups and certainly different nationalities, but now we're moving into different classes and occupations. And and Luke is making the point that it's being spread to people who are entirely different than you would find in Jerusalem.
And again, this is sort of a history, because it's early church, and as the church is progressing, where have we come from, who was coming in, and it's a recounting of the beginning.
Yeah, well, that's exactly what this is supposed to be. That's exactly right. That's
And
exactly
so
what Luke's
sometimes
trying to
I
do.
try and look at it as the Bible rather than a recollection of this is what has transpired and this is how we moved along.
Well,
For people who don't know.
and you mean people who would be reading it?
Yes.
Yes, well, that is true. You don't put something down on paper or parchment or papyrus or whatever unless you intend to have somebody read it and that it's intended to last. If you want something to be ephemeral, you just tell it to them
And this is
have to
put in
forget.
terms that they would understand it way back then.
Well, yes, always, yes, that's true. And again, we're seeing that Luke is creating a case, and he is showing people who may have been, like he was probably, educated in rhetoric, which was very important part of Roman schooling, and Greek schooling, where you construct an argument. And you construct
To bring
an argument,
about belief.
and you give evidence. And so he is showing the evidence why you should reach a conclusion. It's not that different than law today. You give evidence and you present the evidence. And the jury, you hope, makes the right conclusion. And on that note.
No, it's great, thank you.
How did we do it?
How do we do it?
Get done so quickly, right on schedule.
58 minutes.
We didn't digress.
I like it when we digress.
So do I. I learned new things. I'm sorry I'll miss the next 3 weeks.
Another trip?
Are you off
Yes.
gallivanting?
I am.